report on a journey to the western states of North America and a stay of several years along the Missouri during the years 1824 to 1827 by Gottfried Duden. Sixth letter. Washington in Pennsylvania, September 20, 1824. Number 8. You must not expect a description of Baltimore. I hate such a task so much that I would be tempted merely to copy the reports of others. However, I do want to mention the clean and regularly laid out streets, from which the dirt is removed by means of subterranean canals, the gas illumination in the best parts of the city, the white marble in so many dwellings, the general use of carpets, as well as the sumptuousness of furniture. All can do much to change the ideas of European arrivals that they have come to a wilderness. Among the buildings, the Stock Exchange and the Diocesan Catholic Church are especially noteworthy. One can see, at a distance from the bay, a hill in the northern part of the city with an obelisk-like monument to the immortal Washington. In the city itself, there is another monument to the citizens who fell in 1814 in the successful defense of Baltimore against the English. In the museum of Mr. Peel, I found a complete skeleton of the mammoth and a complete skeleton of the megatherium, the American giant sloth, with its claw-shaped feet. In front, the mammoth was 11 feet high to the upper part of the shoulder. From the rear up to the upper part of the hip, it was 9 feet high and 17 feet long. The entire desiccated skeleton is said to weigh over 1,000 pounds. The megatherium almost equaled it. At first, a great number of Negroes and mulattoes did not especially appeal to me, but this feeling is very transient. Almost all the men driving rented coaches are colored people, a current expression for Negroes and mulattoes. Their coaches are of good appearance, and some cannot be distinguished from a European state coach. One finds them on all of the main streets, and for 25 cents, 1 franc equals 5 cents, they drive to any part of the city. The heat was rather fierce, however, because of the general custom of using umbrellas for protection against the rays of the sun. One suffers less from it than all the streets of German cities. Riders with umbrellas are not an unusual sight, and for long horse rides they are considered more useful than coats, except during the short winter. The inns in Baltimore are not more expensive than those on the lower Rhine, but if one wishes to live in private houses, which in North America is very common and necessary for proper rest and quiet during a longer stay, one can count on good board and room from $4 to $5 per week, 10 to 12 and 1/2 Dutch guilders. In the best inns, the cost is $7.50 to $9. Nothing about the way of life here astonishes the Germans so much as the frequent eating of meat. Even early in the morning the table is full of meat dishes, and in this respect there is no difference between breakfast and the noon meal. Wine is rarely served in the inns. Until now, little wine has been produced in the interior, and foreign wines are subject to a high duty. With the exception of the brandies, French brandy, peach brandy, Genève, and whiskey, corn brandy, coffee seems to have been substituted. Coffee and tea are served not only at breakfast, but also at supper, and often even at the noon meal. The spirits mentioned above are, moreover, always diluted with water, and the European who is used to wine feels quite satisfied with them. At least he is safe from the many harmful mixtures from which wine suffers in Europe. The greatest variety of dishes is served at the same time, and as soon as the food is on the table, the sound of the second bell, which is preceded a quarter of an hour earlier by the ringing of a bell as a signal to be ready, calls the guests into the dining room. They often rush in hastily, as if it were a matter of very serious business, and without much conversation they appease their hunger in all haste, most often eating from one and the same plate, using their own handkerchiefs instead of napkins. In 5 or 10 minutes they leave again. This is most disgusting in the evening. Instead of an evening meal that begins between 8 and 9 o'clock and is followed by dessert and prolonged discussion, The food is placed on the table as early as 7 o'clock, when the midday meal has not yet been digested. Attention is directed strictly toward filling the stomach quickly, so that even a longer stay in the dining room would be considered contrary to the rules. In some inns, to be sure, tea and coffee are served around 5 o'clock, and then the evening meal follows at about 9. But as far as the duration of the meal and sociability are concerned, it is the same everywhere. If you look on the map at the place where I've dated my present letter, you will notice that I am already beyond the Allegheny Mountains, and some words concerning this trip might be more welcome to you than the above descriptions relating to food and table manners. I did not remain in Baltimore more than 10 days, not longer than was necessary to make preparations for the long journey into the interior. Above all, I provided myself with excellent maps. Then I procured various letters of recommendation, in order not to be entirely without support in case of accidents. Money matters I arranged by having the Bank of the United States issue me banknotes made out to me personally and redeemable in specially designated branch banks. I took with me, partly in cash and partly in banknotes, only as much as I thought I would need until I reached the next designated branch. A foreigner must be wary of accepting banknotes from strangers. It is best to obtain them from the bank comptroller himself. Also, one must be very careful to distinguish the notes of the United States Federal from the notes of individual states and private banks, of which there are very many. It is better to have nothing to do with the latter if one is not completely familiar with the rate of exchange. While attending to these matters of business, I and my traveling companion, a young fellow countryman who intends to settle in America as a farmer, bought 2 draft horses and a wagon with good springs. In Baltimore, there is a horse market twice a week. We found the prices low. Strong draft horses cost $50 to $80. A part of our baggage was stored in the wagon. The rest was entrusted to freight transportation. On 25 August, the journey to the Ohio began. Our first objective was the little town of Wheeling. It is 260 miles from Baltimore and connected with it by a highway, turnpike, which was constructed by funds from all the states and completed only a few years ago. Baltimore is closer to the Ohio than any other seaport, and after Pittsburgh, the shortest direct route from Baltimore converges in Wheeling. During the first days, we traveled through rolling and rather extensively cultivated land. We could have imagined we were traveling in Germany, had it not been for the unfamiliarity of the architecture of some of the dwellings, the general type of construction of the barns and granaries, and the fencing of the fields. To be sure, Negro families dispel the illusion most frequently. One soon becomes accustomed to the black faces of the adults, but groups of naked and half-naked children still arrest my attention. They all have something droll about them that one seldom notices among the whites. Aside from their color, the figures seem to be carved out of wood instead of having pleasing curves. This and their shyness in the presence of whites, as if they were considered creatures of a higher order, stimulates the interest of the European at first more strongly than can the more beautiful groups of white children. The style of architecture mentioned above is a product of the abundance of building timber. The amount of labor involved is very insignificant. If, for example, the building is to be 30 feet long, 24 feet wide, and 18 feet high up to the roof, one fells tree trunks 24 feet long for the narrow sides, and an equal number 30 feet long for the long sides. One begins the construction at the long sides of the foundation by laying 2 logs on stone bases. The 2 logs function as base plates. The ends of these plates are tapered off on the upper surfaces for the purpose of notching the succeeding logs. Now a short log is placed on each narrow side, which, after having been notched at each end, must rest firmly on the ends of the base plates. After the ends of these short logs have been tapered off, as previously the ends of the long logs, new long logs are placed on the long sides and fitted to the ends of the short ones by notching. This is repeated until the proper height is reached. Then, for the construction of the gable-shaped roof, the new logs are placed closer to each other on the long sides, which requires shorter logs than before on the narrow sides. As the new long logs are moved closer and closer together, the logs of the narrow sides become shorter and shorter until finally a single long log across the middle of the highest short log forms the peak of the roof. Such a roof frame is then covered either with shingles and nails, or a kind of large shingle, clapboard, is placed loosely upon it and held fast by the weight of other logs. The open spaces are easily closed with clay or limestone. The logs felled for dwellings are usually squared on the outer and inner sides. According to an old custom, the structure is erected with the help of neighbors at no cost other than that of providing food. The type of fencing is also selected with the intention of avoiding the labor of carpenters and joiners by a more generous use of wood. Split logs, rails, which are 10 feet long and weigh about 40 to 60 pounds, are laid in zigzag fashion over each other, thereby creating the strongest barriers fence, which confine horses and cattle as well as hogs. In Germany, these animals are confined, but here they run around freely and the fences serve to keep them from certain areas. I shall have occasion to speak more about this later. Not less conspicuous than the buildings were the large cornfields. Then there were interspersed plantings of cotton and the splendid miracle plant from whose seeds ricinus oil, castor oil, is gained, which is very valuable because of its gentle, laxative characteristics. The soil did not seem especially fertile to us, and in general in need of fertilizer. The woods consisted mostly of oaks and of several species of nut trees called hickory. Beneath them, the ground was covered with the mint, pennyroyal, whose fragrance became annoying at times. Among the wild birds, the beautiful colors of the woodpeckers most attracted our attention. We drove along past Ellicott's Mill, Poplar Spring, and Newmarket, without any diversions except the isolated brooks and small rivers winding their way through shady ravines and valleys, some to the Patapsco, some to the Patuxent. In the broad valley of the Monocacy, a tributary of the Potomac, the landscape becomes charming. On the right shore lies the small town of Frederickstown, whose surrounding region has the reputation of rare fertility. The agricultural establishments all bear the stamp of prosperity. The town itself, 44 English miles from Baltimore, has about 3,000 inhabitants. Most of the houses are made of brick and have a pleasing architecture. The streets are wide and well paved. 6 miles beyond Frederickstown, we came upon our first mountain range, which in Maryland and Virginia is called the South Range, Southern Mountains. There are still many contradictions in geography books as well as in travel reports concerning the formation and the course of individual mountain ranges that go by the general name of the Alleghanies. The Americans themselves complain about it. For example, see Darby's work entitled The Guide of the Emigrants, which appeared in 1819 in New York. Now that I have all the ranges behind me, I shall attempt to communicate to you my ideas as they have developed from the combination of my own observations and the information gained from the most recent writings and maps. For the sake of completeness, I shall begin with a few words concerning the surface of the United States in general. From all geographic encyclopedias, one can learn that the shape of North America, and especially of the United States, is determined mainly by 2 mountain ranges. One of these ridges is not far from the Atlantic coast and runs, except for the peninsula of Florida, which juts out into the sea, almost parallel to it from northeast to southwest. It is called the Alleghany Mountains, in a broader sense, or the Appalachian Mountains. The former appellation was common among the northern Indians and is said to mean endless mountains in their language. The name Appalachian is derived from the Indian tribe of the same name who lived in Georgia between the Savannah and Altamaha rivers. It was used generally in the South. The other far higher and longer chain extends along the Pacific coast from northwest to southeast. It is called the Rocky Mountains, which can be considered a continuation of the Mexican Andes.